In this video, we're going to take a look here at 1 Timothy chapter 3, and I'm just going to focus in on verses 8 through 12, and spend a little bit of time as well on the kind of the controversial passage in verse 11. So I'll first of all read the text. So in the same way, deacons are to be worthy of respect, sincere, not indulging in much wine, and not pursuing dishonest gain. They must keep hold of the deep truths of the faith with a clear conscience. They must first be tested, and then, if there is nothing against them, let them serve as deacons. In the same way, the women are to be worthy of respect, not malicious talkers, but temperate and trustworthy in everything. A deacon must be faithful to his wife and must manage his children and his household well. Those who have served well gain an excellent standing and great assurance in their faith in Christ Jesus. So let's note a couple of things here about what we're discussing in these few verses. The word that is translated deacons, this is behind it is the Greek word diakonos, and we have some similar words here in Greek: diakonos, diakonia, diakoneo. All this kind of semantic range are used in the New Testament to convey the idea of a person involved in service, a server, like a waiter, or some kind of an attendant. And it's used in this way in just a general sense of any kind of servants. So sometimes in the New Testament, in an English translation, you might even see someone who is called a servant, and it might be interpreting here the diakonos word. Or it can sometimes be used specifically for people who are engaged in some kind of Christian ministry. So I have here on the screen several scriptures that references where it's used either in a general sense or whether it's used in kind of Christian ministry. 8 virtues are listed in connection with the servers. So some are very similar to the virtues that are expressed or expected about the overseers. So this idea of not giving to much wine, not greedy, the idea of blameless. So some of these same things are being expected out of these servants, these people designated as special servants. 2 are unique. They're not to be double-tongued, an interesting expression, which probably conveys the idea of kind of hypocritical, so that they will say one thing, but also at a different time say something else. So they're not to be a double-tongued, nor they're all to hold on to the mystery of faith. And so this idea of holding on to this mystery. So in terms of mystery, how this concept is used at the time in which the New Testament was written, it conveys something of the idea of things that were once hidden but now are revealed. And so I'm kind of noticing here as well that the NIV, for instance, decides to translate the mysterion, the Greek word that's used here, mysterion, which we get this idea of mystery from. They translate it as deep truths. So probably because they want to try and avoid the idea that the faith itself is mysterious in some sense. It's not that the faith is mysterious, but the content of the faith, the message that is believed was once hidden, but now has been revealed. And so something that was once hidden, once maybe not understood, not anticipated, but now has become revealed as things that God is doing in the world. That's a mystery. And they'll hold it with a clear conscience. And so again, this idea of a conscience as it was used during this time is not so much a a feeling or a sense that I have done something wrong. In other words, a clear conscience is not one in which I just don't feel bad, but a clear conscience is my conscience is one that has not led me to do things that are wrong or in disobedience. So it's not so much about a feeling as much as it is about how the the mind um, works in terms of leading someone to do certain things. The server is to be judged first. Now, it's not quite clear what it means to be judged. This was a term that was used in the kind of Athenian court to refer to a screening of a candidate for a public office. And so, we may have something of the same kind of idea here, because these people are going to be holding some kind of office or some kind of special responsibility. Of course, all Christians are supposed to serve one another. So the idea of being a servant is kind of rooted into the idea for all believers. But certain Christians are designated as special servants. So they're going to hold an office. They're going to be entrusted with certain specific responsibilities. And so in this way, they are kind of tested to determine whether they have the character to hold this office. So it suggested that Paul is talking about a church office with a specific function, just as opposed to anybody who serves. Now, I'm going to look here at the controversial verse 11. So in the same way, now the NIV here would have the women. So the Greek word behind the word women is gonaikas, and so this word is the word that's used to refer to women in general. But it's has caused some division in terms of in what sense do you mean the women here? Who are these women who are now supposed to be worthy of respect, not malicious talkers, temperate and trustworthy in everything? Who are you referring to? So some have understood this to refer to deacons' wives. And so some of the reasons why they think this is because Paul would not jump back to men. Men is the men who are the deacons in verse 12 if he had finished addressing them in verse 11 and verse 10. So in other words, he's been talking about these male deacons, and then if he switches to somehow or another talking about female deacons, then he comes back to male deacons in verse 12. And so this kind of jumping back and forth, the argument is that probably would not have been done if by the author. And so trying to understand this as more their wives. They're still thinking about these male deacons and what's expected out of the male deacons' wives. Also, because Paul is just about to give instructions on a deacon's household, it's argued that it makes sense that he would make reference to their wives. So he's going to talk about being faithful to their women, and before he does so, he's going to be talking about the women that they're going to be faithful to. If Paul wanted to be talked about deaconesses, it's argued, he would have given more details. So there's very few details here. So if you've got female deaconesses, we would expect, or they think we would expect, more details about them. And sometimes argue that this cannot refer to a general church office because Paul, in chapter 2, prohibits women from exercising authority over men. So if you have deaconesses, then the assumption is that these deaconesses might carry out authority for their service, and that authority could be exercised over men, and that would disagree with what Paul has said in chapter 2. So those are some of the reasons why deaconesses are deacons' wives is suggested as the interpretation of this word. But others see it as arguing for in favor of deaconesses. And so that this word women is referring to female deacons. So one is that the word women is used because there is no feminine form of diakonos. So in Greek, there are genders with words, just like this is true in many other languages. There are masculine words and feminine words. And so the word for deacon, diakonos, is, as the ending would tell us, the ending of that word, the OS or the Omicron sigma, would indicate that this is a masculine, it could be neuter, but a masculine word. And since that is the case, when you use diakonos, you're talking about, or you're assuming that it may be for a male servant. Now, one could say as well that, well, there are other masculine words, or at least masculine appearing words that can be used that can be including women. So, but nevertheless, here we have an argument for why it should be a deaconesses. The other argument made is that it structurally parallels the instructions to men. So, in the same way, deacons. In the same way, women. So, in that way, there's this parallel of in the introduction to the instructions. Also, verses 8 and verse 11 are dependent on the verb that's kind of holding all of this together, basically from verse 2 on, when it talks about that the overseer must be. Well, that's where the main verb is, and in verse 8, there is no verb. The deacons must be or are to be. English translations provide the verb there. In the Greek, there's not a verb. And so it goes back to that verb must be to say what deacons are. And here in verse 11, it's again going back to that same verb to say what the women ought to be. So since 8 and 11 are both dependent on it is necessary or must, in verse 2, it implies that there are now 3 categories: overseers, male deacons, female deacons. Fourth, if Paul wanted to say their wives, if he was talking about wives, he could have used the possessive pronoun, the word their, or a definitive article, the word the, because the before women, the women, could be more suggestive of their wives. But there is no definitive article in Greek, nor is there this possessive pronoun. It just says women. And finally, almost to the last thought, is Paul did not address elders' wives. So it's kind of strange. Why would deacons' wives have to be singled out to talk about what's required for them, and elders' wives were not singled out? So the elders, at least, is supposed to be a one-man woman, a one-woman man, one-woman man, and if that's understood as the husband of one wife, so it's kind of expecting him to be married, and so why isn't that wife singled out with some kind of instructions about how they're to behave? Why is it that deacons are? So they are. Well, it doesn't make sense that deacons would be singled out, which is a lower category, and so their wives are having a higher standard than what elders' wives would have to have. And sometimes it's argued as well that Romans 16:1 indicates an example of a deaconess. So if anybody wanted to say, well, there are no examples of deaconesses in the first century, so it couldn't be a deaconess, someone else might point to Romans 16:1, where Phoebe is called a a diakonos. Now, the problem is, she is called a diakonos, but she's called a servant. But it's not clear in Romans 16:1 if that should be understood as an office that he's addressing Phoebe, commending Phoebe, who holds an office, or he's just commending Phoebe in his letter because she is a servant. She is someone who serves, and she's commended because she is a serving Christian. So, some might argue that Paul generally doesn't commend people because of their having an office, but he more likely commends people because of work that they do. The Romans 16:1 passage may not be as strong as an argument as what it would appear. So anyway, these are the arguments kind of for and against treating this very interesting word either as deacons' wives or for deaconesses. And so I think I will leave it for there.